It all started on a warm Saturday morning in late spring, the kind where the sun glows golden over the hills and the air smells faintly of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. My ranch sat quietly on the edge of a sleepy town in northern Texas, 500 acres of rolling pastures, oak trees, and one big, beautiful lake right in the center. I bought the property 5 years earlier after leaving the corporate grind, and that lake had been my favorite spot ever since. I'd swim in it on hot days, fish at dusk, and sometimes sit on the dock with a cold drink, watching the herons glide across the surface. But that morning I had something special planned. After months of restoration work and a fair bit of trial and error, my old houseboat, once a rotting wreck I bought for practically nothing, was finally ready for her first float. She wasn't fancy, but she was mine. The hull gleamed a new coat of ivory paint, the deck was sealed tight, and the name The Serenity curved proudly along her side in hand-painted navy letters. I had no idea that my simple act of floating her into my own lake would spark a neighborhood scandal worthy of the evening news. You see, although I owned my property outright, the lake was technically shared with the surrounding subdivision, a group governed by an overzealous homeowners association. When I first bought the ranch, the HOA had tried to rope me into their little club, but I politely declined. They didn't like that much. From then on, I was that guy on the edge of the lake, the outsider who didn't attend meetings or follow their endless rules about grass height and mailbox color. I didn't care much for their suburban politics. I just wanted peace and quiet. Unfortunately, peace and quiet weren't on the agenda that day. By mid-morning, I had the houseboat hitched to my tractor, slowly rolling it down the dirt path toward the water. My friend Mike, an old mechanic and part-time fishing buddy, was there to help. "You sure this thing's gonna float?" he teased, tossing me a rope. "She's been tested and sealed," I said confidently. "If she sinks, you're buying lunch." We laughed as the boat's hull touched the water, the reflection rippling like a living mirror. The Serenity bobbed gently, perfectly balanced. I stepped aboard, feeling the satisfying sway beneath my feet. Mike whooped and gave a mock salute. "Captain," he shouted. I grinned and fired up the small outboard motor, guiding her toward the middle of the lake. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. About 10 minutes later, I noticed a small group gathering on the far side of the lake near the subdivision's walking trail. They were pointing, gesturing, and clearly talking about me. I waved politely, assuming they were just curious. But then a familiar voice pierced the air, shrill and commanding. "Hey, you can't have that thing out here." It was Margaret Baxter, the self-appointed president of the HOA, a woman whose main hobby seemed to be gossip and issuing violation letters. Behind her stood 2 other board members, each clutching clipboards like weapons. "Morning, Margaret," I called back cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Don't you morning me," she snapped. "That's not an approved structure. You can't put that on the lake without authorization from the board." I couldn't help but laugh. "Authorization? Margaret, this is my lake, my property. This lake," she said with theatrical emphasis, "is a shared community resource governed under HOA regulations. You can't just put a houseboat on it." I tried reasoning with her, explaining that the boundaries were clear. My side of the lake wasn't within the HOA's jurisdiction. But logic wasn't her strong suit. Within minutes, she was waving her phone in the air, threatening to call the authorities. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "I'll wait right here." And she did. About 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in a patrol car, their tires crunching the gravel by the lake. I recognized one of them, Deputy Harris, who'd stopped by a few months back when a neighbor's goats wandered onto my land. He gave me a bemused look as he stepped out of the car. "Morning, Jack," he said, tipping his hat. "You causing trouble again?" "Depends on who you ask," I said, gesturing toward Margaret, who immediately launched into a tirade about property laws, permits, and community standards. "She's got quite a list," Harris said dryly when she finished. "You mind telling me what's going on?" "Sure," I said. "This is my property, my lake. I built this boat and decided to float her today. The HOA thinks they can control what I do on land I pay taxes for." Harris nodded, scratching his chin. "You got paperwork to show it's private?" I handed him the deed, neatly folded in a waterproof sleeve. He glanced at it, then at Margaret, whose face had gone redder than a stoplight. "Well, Mrs. Baxter," he said slowly, "looks to me like he's within his rights. This here lake boundary stops short of his dock." But, but that's absurd," she stammered. "We maintain the trail around it. We manage the water quality." "Doesn't change the property line," Harris said, handing the deed back. "Far as I can tell, Mr. Lawson here is not breaking any laws." The silence that followed was delicious. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. The other HOA members shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing they'd overplayed their hand. "This isn't over," she finally hissed. "We'll be filing a formal complaint with the county." "Go right ahead," I said with a smile. "Make sure you spell my name right." As the deputies drove off, Mike chuckled from the dock. "You think she's going to have a stroke?" "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not giving her CPR." By that afternoon, word had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. People who barely said 2 words to me before were suddenly strolling down to see the houseboat. Some were genuinely impressed, asking if I'd built it myself. Others whispered behind their hands, probably wondering if it violated some obscure ordinance about nautical aesthetics. I didn't care either way. I sat on the deck, feet up, cold beer in hand, watching the sun dip low over the water. The Serenity lived up to her name that day. But as evening settled in and the cicadas began to sing, I couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA wasn't done with me. Margaret Baxter wasn't the type to admit defeat. I half expected a letter to arrive in the mail the next morning, printed on fancy letterhead with bold words like cease and desist. Still, I wasn't worried. I knew the law, and more importantly, I knew leverage when I saw it. The HOA could complain all they wanted, but the lake and the boat were mine to enjoy. Later that night, I sat inside the cabin of the Serenity, a single lantern casting a soft glow across the wooden walls. The air was warm and still, carrying the faint croak of frogs from the shoreline. I thought about how ridiculous the day had been. The arguments, the shouting, the flashing lights, and found myself laughing out loud. It was amazing how something as simple as a floating houseboat could unravel the delicate fabric of an HOA's authority. I made a quiet vow right then. I wouldn't be bullied by people who thought rules were more important than reason. What I didn't realize then was that the day's events were only the beginning. The confrontation on the lake was just the spark that would ignite something much bigger, a sequence of events that would end with me holding the deed to their pride and joy, the community Marina. But at that moment, all I knew was that the water beneath me shimmered with moonlight, and the Serenity rocked gently like a cradle. The HOA could keep their regulations, their bylaws, their endless meetings about hedge heights and fence colors. I had my lake, my boat, and my freedom. As I leaned back in the captain's chair, I heard Mike's voice echo from the dock one last time. "You know she's going to lose her mind when she sees you out there tomorrow morning, right?" "Good," I said with a grin. "Maybe she'll finally learn what the word ownership means." And with that, I killed the lantern, let the night wrap around me, and drifted slowly toward the middle of the lake, content, unbothered, and completely unaware that my little act of defiance had set the stage for one of the most satisfying turnarounds of my life. The morning after the houseboat incident dawned bright and quiet, though I could almost feel the tension humming in the air before I even left the cabin. Mist hung low over the water, soft and ghost-like, curling around the Serenity as if to protect her from the chaos that was surely brewing on shore. I brewed a pot of coffee on the small propane stove and stepped onto the deck with my mug, watching the sun break through the fog. From my vantage point in the middle of the lake, I could see movement along the trail, people walking faster than usual, heads together in that unmistakable posture of gossip. No doubt Margaret Baxter had been up late drafting an emergency HOA memo about my marine violation. I smiled in my coffee. If she thought a sternly worded letter was going to scare me, she didn't know who she was dealing with. By 9 o'clock, my phone started pinging with messages from neighbors. Some were amused. "Dude, you're a legend." Others curious. "Are you allowed to do that?" And one even supportive. "That HOA's been out of control for years. Good on you." But what really caught my attention was a text from my friend Chris, a real estate broker who specialized in local commercial properties. "You won't believe this," he wrote. "Marina's up for sale again. Bank's been trying to unload it for months. You should buy it just to mess with those HOA folks." I laughed at first, but then the idea began to simmer. The Marina. The same one the HOA bragged about in their monthly newsletter. They held their summer events there, their fishing tournaments, their self-congratulatory picnics complete with catered sandwiches and banners that read pride of the lakeside community. They didn't own the marina, though most of them didn't even realize that. It had been privately managed for years by a small investment group that recently went under. The property had gone on the market quietly, probably because it needed repairs and new management. I set my coffee down and stared across the water at the familiar row of docks glinting in the distance. By their marina. It sounded insane, but also poetic. A perfect reversal. Yesterday they tried to dictate what I could do on my own land. Today I could decide whether they had a place to tie up their precious boats. By 10, I was on the phone with Chris. "You serious about this?" he asked. "Dead serious," I said. "How fast can we make it happen?" He whistled. "Cash offer, maybe by this afternoon. It's been sitting so long. The bank will bite at anything reasonable. You sure you want to drop that kind of money just to prove a point?" "Not just to prove a point," I said, grinning. "To make one loud enough they'll hear it echo across the lake." I transferred funds, signed electronic documents, and by 3 that afternoon the deal was essentially done. A title company would handle the rest by the end of the week, but I already had an email from the bank confirming the sale. I owned the marina. The irony was delicious. In less than 7 hours, I'd gone from public enemy number 1 to landlord of the HOA's most cherished amenity. That evening, I motored the Serenity to the marina just to take a look around. The docks creaked pleasantly beneath my boots. A few boats rocked gently in their slips, most of them owned by HOA members who had no idea yet that their new dockmaster was the man they'd called the cops on. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. I walked to the end of the pier, looked back at the lights of the subdivision, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, quiet satisfaction. I didn't announce it immediately. I wanted them to discover it. And sure enough, it didn't take long. 2 days later, during their regularly scheduled Tuesday HOA meeting, the rumor hit like a thunderclap. I was sitting at my kitchen table eating dinner when my phone buzzed, another message from Chris. They just found out. Apparently, Margaret nearly fainted. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my food. The next morning, a neatly printed letter appeared in my mailbox bearing the HOA's official seal. I half expected it to be another threat or complaint, but when I opened it, the tone was strikingly polite. "Dear Mr. Lawson, we understand you have recently acquired the Lakeside Marina property," followed by a request to schedule a meeting to discuss the continuation of our mutual relationship. Mutual relationship, my foot. They were panicking. I decided to attend their meeting in person, not out of spite. Well, maybe a little, but because some moments in life are too good to experience secondhand. The next evening, I showed up at the community clubhouse wearing jeans, boots, and a clean white shirt. When I walked in, the chatter died instantly. Every face in the room turned toward me, some curious, some nervous, and Margaret's downright furious. "Mr. Lawson," she said stiffly, "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us tonight." "Thought I'd drop by," I said easily. "Figured we had some common interest to discuss." Her jaw tightened. "Yes, well, I suppose congratulations are in order. You purchased the marina?" "That's right," I said, handing her a folder. "Closed yesterday. Here's the deed and the transfer documents. Looks like your HOA now rents dock space from me." The room fell silent again. Margaret blinked, opened the folder, and stared at the papers as though they were written in another language. "This must be some kind of mistake," she said finally. "No mistake," I replied. "The bank was happy to sell. I'm planning to make a few improvements, fix the walkways, update the lighting. But don't worry, I'll honor all existing rental agreements for now." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. A few of the board members actually looked impressed. Others tried to hide their smiles. Margaret, however, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. "You can't use this as leverage to undermine our community standards," she snapped. "I wouldn't dream of it," I said smoothly. "But I think we can agree it's a bit ironic, considering you tried to have me removed from my own lake last week." She sputtered something about professionalism, about how she'd acted only in the community's best interest, but the words barely made sense. The power dynamic in that room had shifted completely, and everyone knew it. I thanked them for their time, said I looked forward to working together, and walked out before she could recover. The next day, I posted a simple notice at the Marina gate under new ownership, future upgrades in progress. Within hours, boat owners were dropping by, introducing themselves, asking about plans for improvements. Most were friendly, relieved even. Turns out many had been frustrated with how the HOA handled marina access, too many restrictions, too little maintenance. I told them my goal was simple: make the marina better for everyone without the bureaucracy. They loved it. Over the next few weeks, I kept my word. I hired local contractors to repair the docks, repaint the buildings, and install proper lighting. The place started to shine again. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd take the Serenity out for a short cruise, sometimes waving to the same neighbors who once glared at me from shore. Now they waved back, some sheepishly, some genuinely. Even Margaret eventually came around, though she avoided eye contact for months. The transformation wasn't just physical. Something in the community shifted. The HOA quieted down, became less combative, even a little humble. They stopped sending out pointless violation notices. Meetings became more about actual community improvement than control. Maybe they realized that power only means something if people respect it, and respect isn't earned through threats or bylaws. One evening, about 2 months after the purchase, I sat on the upper deck of the Marina's office building, looking out over the calm water. Lights reflected on the surface like 1,000 tiny stars. The Serenity was moored near the far dock, gently rocking. Mike joined me with 2 bottles of beer, handed me one and said, "Never thought I'd see the day you owned the whole damn lake." "Neither did I said, clinking bottles. "But sometimes life hands you the perfect bit of poetic justice." He chuckled. "You really think they learned their lesson?" I smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll just think twice before telling someone what they can't do on their own land." The night air was cool and still. I took a long sip of beer, letting the quiet settle in. The HOA could keep their rules and regulations. I had my boat, my marina, and my freedom, all hard, one all well-earned. The Serenity floated proudly nearby, her reflection steady and sure. And for the first time since buying that ranch, I felt not just at peace, but in complete control of my own slice of the world.